I wrote another paper that I wanted to share with you guys. The title is called Exodia. It was written to provide you with a perspective on the rupture that humanity is currently living through. It describes the result of a race for survival being run by society's ego, and it gives an idea for why it happens. It discusses how that race impacts us, how to recognize that impact within us, and also how we should be thinking about change moving forward. The paper itself draws on several illuminated texts throughout history, across all continents, over the last several thousand years. The universal truth of the author's backgrounds from these books suggests to me that their primary goal is to excavate the foundational layer of who we are, regardless of creed or color. These authors attempted to articulate spiritual mastery through direct lived experience in their lifetime. In doing so, they did their best to work around the limits of language and interpretation to communicate what I believe to be at least 5 foundational truths of the world around us. Those who digested the author's work were often limited by their own ego. These limitations led to the decoupling of truth from reality for a portion of the people who interpreted these words. They skipped the understanding phase of learning, which challenges people to grow in favor of points of view that fed their own egos or protected them. If they did this repeatedly, those individuals, they would become rigid at best or tyrannical at worst in how they demand the world to form around them. That's what leads to the first point of this paper. Our first step is to realize that we're not just the ego. The ego is a conscious part of our larger self, both existing within the mind. The ego wears a mask called the persona. While interacting with the world to protect itself, because it doesn't see a deeper connection to self, it uses this persona as a shield. Sometimes the ego can see itself as a god with nothing above it. It becomes wholly dependent on its own capacity to affect change in the world around it. And we see this a lot throughout the United States political system. It's pretty obvious that there's a group of people in this world that think if they can control everything, then it'll be all right. My question is, who is it going to be all right for? Who's going to pay that price? Their ego is desperately trying to stay in control because it believes control is how it has experiences of pain and pleasure while remaining alive. Given the chance, the ego will subjugate the self, and in doing so, it'll mutate the person that we show up as in other people's lives into something that those other people need to protect themselves from. This is the process of recognition. It creates space to grow. This leads us to the second point of the paper. Our next step is to excavate the ego, to uncover the self before the self is excavated by the ego. We must learn to trust ourselves. If we don't do this, the race for survival that I mentioned at the beginning of the paper will begin, and society will suffer greatly. If we continue in this state, we degrade mentally, spiritually, and physically until there's no life left to live, and the self is fully excavated in favor of the ego. This is the process of excavation. It promotes alignment with balance between the self and the ego. Through the process of excavation, we learn to sit with the contradictions in our lives and let go of what holds us back in favor of what liberates us, even if that comes at great personal cost. In this focused effort, we learn about how the conscious and unconscious parts of who we are interact, why we do the things that we do, and how others are a reflection of our own perspectives. Once we fully excavate, we begin to bring those 5 pieces of truth together by being a witness to the world around us as our true self, without falling victim to the ego-driven protection mechanisms that destroy our understanding and limit our connection to each other. This step requires reading about the full range of humanity that's on display in society and within ourselves, writing about how we interpret it, and sharing that with others gainfully. Our job becomes to map how our personal experiences have impacted the experiences of others around us, and in doing so, we identify others in ourselves. We're not that different. This is the process of atonement. It's the trailhead all spiritual initiates embark on. This leads us to the 3rd point of the paper. Who you are is not separate from the world around you. Through the process of atonement, you learn to discover that beneath the ego and the self exists a universal force which animates everything in your range of perception. This force is energy which animates you, and it lives alongside of you. Your lived experience is essentially information that's made from this energy being interpreted by the ego through the persona and the self within. Meaning that you are literally a piece of the whole, knowing itself and the whole at the same time. It's quite a contradiction. The only difference between you and any other person in this world, at a core level, is your appearance on the outside. There are no chosen people, only chosen experiences. Every piece of information that will or will not exist is part of this experience. It all lives in an ocean, a sea of something, oscillating between the formation, peak, and deformation of various waves. The underlying foundation is still one body of water, and separation of any single wave is a form of illusion. This is the process of dissolution. It removes the weights which hold us back and allow us to identify with something that is deep beneath the surface. This leads us to our 4th part of the paper. If separation is a hallucination, then the ego's job of protecting itself is an apparition, which can only serve your suffering. Even if you don't experience that suffering directly, you export your suffering to other waves in your vicinity, while ignoring the impacts that your suffering has on others. In the process, you become numb, and the self wilts. The ego gains power. The 4th point is probably the hardest to reconcile in the paper. Many will actively choose to continue living in a way which hurts others, while ignoring the damage that they're doing to themselves. They rationalize it. They feel like they have to, that they don't have a choice. Once they believe that they're a wave separate from any of the other waves in the ocean, they'll begin to take on fear of loss and rejection, or scarcity, or death. This fear is what drives the need for control in the environment. The result is we project our suffering, our own fears and limitations to others through our own actions. once we remember that we don't control the water which forms the waves at the surface, rather, it's the water below the surface or the winds above that control the waves themselves, we begin to let go of these anxieties driven by the ego, and we live as the foundational energies that exist below the surface. In the process, this conflict that I mentioned, the fears, they subside, the struggles, they lose meaning, and death becomes a required step in the formation of new life, like we have always known to be the case. It's only a certain class of people that have existed in this world that believe that they could live forever. And in doing so, they've caused great harm to those around them by trying to build a legacy off of other people's life. If we can learn how to process that conflict effectively, we can start to see that life is a single field of itself, playing out across billions of expressions all over the place. And all of these expressions are trying to remember who they are. It's like they forgot. While at the same time, they're experiencing the pressures of life, which are more than just a little distracting. If we can navigate this successfully, we'll have experienced the process of remembrance. It floods the excavated space with the true self. It makes it harder for the ego to gain a foothold inside of you. This brings us to the 5th point of the Exodia paper, the 5 truths. In all of my reading across different cultures and time, I've witnessed that the first truth that is repeatedly brought up is the truth of identity. It's the idea that we're not separate from this force within us, from the divine. We aren't loved by it either. This world is anything but just love. However, the connection is actually much more intimate. We are the divine wearing human as a costume, expressing the full range of life with all of its ups and downs. The second is alignment, with that idea of balance in mind. Balance between light and dark, good and evil, bad and good. Life wants all of it, not just certain sections, even though we might prefer it. This leads to the fear that we feel in our ego, the fear of that loss or the rejection or the bad, or what if something good doesn't happen, being an illusion. It's not real. It's just a feeling, a very powerful one that can influence how we act. But if we hold on to that fear, it'll keep us asleep to the joys of life. As far as I can tell, love is in alignment with the joys of life, and there are 2 forms of love. There's the love of life itself and the love of the corruption of life. When you let go of the fear that sits inside of you, you can express your most honest version of self. You let go of the patterns which buried that love that existed within you. And you start to realize that fear can misalign your ego to selfish intent, while love itself can realign the ego to selfless intent. The third truth is projection. It's this idea that the mind is a projector that projects whatever you're aligned with into your reality. The brain doesn't record reality. Instead, it actually interprets patterns that carry information. That information is projected onto a screen, which is your persona, who you show up as in this life. And that's used by the mind to build the version of the life that you're experiencing. All of this happens in the gap between when the brain perceives reality and when you become aware of your response. As a result, the illusions of fear or the anxieties of some future circumstance, all of it becomes directly imprinted onto the reality that we experience if we allow that to exist within us. Fourth truth that I found was containment. It's a combination of the first three. If you're the divine, wearing human as a costume, if fear is an illusion, and the mind projects reality into your awareness, then the only thing standing between you and true freedom is the preconditioned beliefs that you agree to, which keep you comfortable. This means that the enemy is not the world around you. It's the ego in your mind, which convinces you to sleep instead of working towards the liberation of the self within you. It creates the illusion of safety in exchange for acceptance that separation is reality. It reigns as God of its own domain by flooding your awareness with noise to drown the original divine essence, to maintain this illusion. It'll work to convince you that you're better, smarter, faster, luckier, wiser, nicer, more driven than everybody else around you. And so long as you remain divided in this sense, the ego is your God and you are its subject. The last truth is connection. It's the principle that everything in this world is connected. No matter how far apart it is, it's sharing some sort of motion. You could think of it like in the sea of water, there's an unknowable number of molecules bumping into each other, constantly exchanging places and energy. This is true for all of reality. The exchange is the foundation of our lives. Without this constant interchange, we wouldn't be able to trade energy for thoughts, which would turn to emotions, which would turn to actions. We would have no lived experience. All of this, the sea of something, exists for your enjoyment. You're free to let it go to waste. You're free to do any unspeakable evils that you could possibly imagine, although I don't think you should. But to disturb somebody else's time here, you are only hurting yourself in the process. To close, when you begin to excavate the ego, it will offer you everything. It'll offer money, power, control. It's an illusion which it cannot fulfill without degrading the mind, body, and soul in the process. Suppressing the self is a form of self-excavation. It creates room for the ego to inflate growing fears in the process. If you refuse the ego's need for growth, you'll experience this rupture in your own life, and suddenly the thrashing in the world around you will make a lot more sense. As we have explored, this turbulence is not the nature of the water, it's the byproduct of panicked actions driven by the ego's fear of losing control. The ego, terrified of its own dissolution, fights to remain separate, creating a projection in reality that binds us to the truth of where we are and what we are. This truth is just something that we believe to be true because it makes us feel good. It's not actual reality. It's how we're viewing the world around us. So this projection is responsible for a lot of the terrible things that we see on the news. The people behind these actions aren't acting as themselves. They're acting as the tyrant ego who's captured the self, and they've completely justified their own actions because it's what's best for them. As an outline, I wanted to pair up the 5 truths and the processes that are associated with them: identity and recognition, alignment and excavation, projection and atonement, containment and dissolution, and finally, connection and remembrance. All of these aren't separate academic concepts. They're pieces of a single dormant whole. When these pieces remain scattered in your mind, the ego rules. It weighs all of society down with a heavy ballast of fear, preconditioned beliefs, and the desperate need for control. We become dense and deeply individual, each driven by our own motivations, passions, and desires, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can become one very quickly. We begin to sink beneath the surface of our own soul into darkness. We become consumed by the pressures of these depths, and we cling to purity like it's our true savior. We reach high above the surface of who we are and become battered by the physical winds in the process. When you work through the debris of the torn mind and assemble balance on terms which benefit both the self and the ego, you'll achieve a state of spiritual buoyancy. You stop fighting the ocean and remember that you are the depths below the surface, the air above, and the waves in between. This is the secret that the ancient masters described in the holy books. To walk on water is not a miracle of defying gravity. It's a natural state of the self which has found its equilibrium with the ego. The surface is the tension point where the deep spirit meets the air of perceived reality. The master is simply the one which can stand at this intersection without sinking into fear of the depths or evaporating into the illusions of this world around us. They stand firm on the horizon of creation. They channel a force that is deep within the water into reality with perfect clarity, benefiting the lives of everybody around them in the process. The rupture that we're facing in society today is not the end. It's simply a summons to experience this process. It's a challenge to gather the scattered pieces of our understanding across time and culture and continents to obliterate this false god of the ego we've been worshiping within us and to finally stand up. The ocean isn't waiting for you to conquer it. It's waiting for you to recognize yourself within it. United, you will stand. Divided, you'll fall.